Tonight, you are going to fall asleep in a bed. You are going to walk into a room, pull back a sheet, lie down on a mattress, and close your eyes. Your body will be horizontal. Your head will rest on a pillow. And none of this will feel unusual, because this is how every night of your life has ended. What if that experience, the simple act of lying down to sleep, was something most humans throughout history could never take for granted? What if the mattress underneath you right now is one of the youngest inventions in your entire home? And what if, in the wealthiest city on the face of the earth, just over 100 years ago, thousands of people paid money not to sleep in a bed, but to sleep standing up, draped over a rope? This is the bizarre, brutal, and surprisingly recent history of how humans learned to sleep. If you'd asked anyone in London in 1888, where the poorest workers slept, they would have pointed you toward the East End, toward streets so narrow that neighbors in facing buildings could shake hands from their windows. And what you would have found inside those buildings will leave you absolutely stunned. In a dark room on Flower and Dean Street, 30 men stand in a row. Their arms hang over a thick rope stretched across the room at chest height. Their chins rest on their collarbones. Some of them sway slightly. The air smells of coal smoke, sweat, and cheap gin. A single gas lamp flickers on the wall. This arrangement had a name: the two-penny hangover. For the price of 2 pennies, a man could rent a spot on the rope for the night, lean forward over it, and attempt to fall asleep standing up. At 5 in the morning, a man known as the valet walked to one end of the rope and cut it. Every person in the room dropped forward at once. Some hit the bench in front of them. Some hit the floor. Nobody complained. Nobody shouted. That fall was the alarm clock. And on some mornings, when the rope was cut, not everyone woke up. Some had frozen to death during the night, still leaning on the rope, still standing. Their bodies were carried out, and the room was prepared for the next evening's customers. That image alone sounds like the worst thing you will hear today. It is not. It is actually the starting point. And the story only gets stranger from here. To understand how sleeping on a rope became a business model, you need to understand that comfortable sleep has never been a given for human beings. It has always been a technology, and for most of our existence on this planet, the technology was terrible. The oldest known mattress on Earth was found inside Sibudu Cave in South Africa. Archaeologists dated it to roughly 77,000 years ago. It was made from layers of sedge grass and the leaves of a plant that happened to be a natural insect repellent, which means the very first mattress in human history was already fighting the same enemy you fight today: bugs. That mattress was about 36 inches wide and 1 inch thick. A modern pillow is thicker than the first bed ever made. For tens of thousands of years after that, sleep was the ground. Leaves, animal hides, maybe some grass piled together. The ancient Egyptians were among the first to realize that getting your body off the floor changed everything. They built raised wooden bed frames to keep sleepers away from snakes, scorpions, and rodents that crawled across the floor at night. Wealthy Egyptians slept on beds made of imported hardwood, sometimes decorated with gold and ebony. The poor still slept on thin mats on the dirt. The Romans took it further. Wealthy Roman citizens stuffed their mattresses with feathers, wool, or reeds, and some of their beds were elevated so high that they needed ladders to climb into them. Picture that for a second. A Roman senator climbing a ladder in his toga to get into bed. Meanwhile, the average Roman citizen slept on a wool-stuffed sack on a wooden plank, and the poorest had nothing but a mat on stone. The gap between rich sleep and poor sleep is not a modern invention. It is one of the oldest inequalities in human civilization. Then came the medieval period, and sleeping got genuinely strange. In medieval Europe, the bed was the most expensive piece of furniture in most households. It was so valuable it was mentioned in wills. Lords and ladies slept in enormous beds with ornate carvings, embroidered canopies, and curtains that turned the bed into a room within a room. Those curtains were not decorative. They blocked drafts and kept insects from landing on sleepers during the night. The mattress underneath was typically a canvas sack filled with straw, wool, or moss. sometimes topped with a feather bed for wealthy families. And here is the detail that changes how you picture the past. Almost nobody slept alone. The entire family shared one bed. Parents in the middle, daughters arranged along the wall in birth order, youngest closest to the mother, sons on the other side, also in age order. And if a guest arrived for the night, they climbed in too. The bed expanded to fit whoever needed to sleep, including traveling strangers at inns. There were actual etiquette rules for sharing a bed with someone you had never met. Lie still. Do not steal the blanket. Keep to your side. In 1776, Benjamin Franklin and John Adams shared a bed at a New Jersey inn and spent most of the night arguing about whether the window should be open or closed. The Great Bed of Ware, built in England around 1590, was designed to sleep 15 people at once. It was twice the size of a modern double bed, and it was a tourist attraction even in its own time. Shakespeare mentioned it. Innkeepers competed to own it because travelers would specifically stop at the inn just to sleep in the famous enormous bed. The mattresses themselves were a problem. Straw mattresses were changed about once a year. Between changes, they became home to fleas, lice, and bedbugs. The phrase, "hit the hay," comes directly from this era. Before climbing into bed, you literally had to beat the straw mattress to knock out the insects hiding inside it. Henry VIII had his straw mattress changed every single day, which tells you two things. He could afford to, and even the King of England had bugs in his bed. Below the straw mattress on most beds was something you would not expect: ropes. Starting in the 16th century, beds were built with wooden frames and a lattice of ropes woven back and forth across them, creating a flexible surface to support the mattress above. These ropes sagged over time, and when they sagged, the mattress dipped in the middle. To fix it, someone had to tighten the ropes using a wooden key, a forked tool that grabbed and twisted the rope until it was taut again. This was such a common household chore that it was usually assigned to children. Rope beds were used for roughly 300 years, from the 1500s all the way to the late 1800s. Many people believe the phrase "sleep tight" comes from tightening these ropes, though linguists say the evidence does not quite support it. The phrase probably just means "sleep soundly," since tight was used as an adverb meaning securely for centuries. But the story is so perfectly logical that it refuses to die. What matters is this. For hundreds of years, the best sleep a human being could get required a wooden frame, a web of rope that had to be manually tightened, a sack of straw full of insects, and if you were lucky, a feather bed on top. That was luxury. That was the good version. Now fast forward to London in the 1880s, and imagine what happened when 4 million people were crammed into a city designed for 1 million. London in 1888 was the capital of the largest empire in human history and the most overcrowded city the world had ever seen. The East End, where the working poor lived, was a maze of narrow streets and crumbling buildings where 8 people shared a single room, and the ground floors were dark at noon because the buildings leaned so close together that they blocked the sky. The air was not air. It was a yellow-brown fog made of coal smoke from 300,000 chimneys, mixed with the stench of horse manure from over 300,000 horses on the streets, each producing between 15 and 30 pounds of dung every single day. That is more than 4 million pounds of horse manure hitting London's streets every 24 hours. Children called crossing sweepers were hired to scoop it up, but they could never keep pace. The manure mixed with rain and formed a brown paste that covered everything. Londoners wore black clothing not as a fashion choice, but because black hid the filth. An entire city dressed in the colour of its own dirt. The River Thames, the heart of London, was an open sewer. Raw waste from 4 million people flowed directly into it, untreated, unfiltered. In the summer of 1858, the smell became so extreme that members of Parliament soaked curtains in chloride of lime and hung them over the windows of the House of Commons. It did not work. They seriously discussed moving the entire government out of the city. The Thames was not a river. It was a shared toilet for 4 million people, and into this city, people kept arriving. From the English countryside where farming had collapsed, from Ireland where famine had scattered families across the sea, From Eastern Europe, where persecution had driven entire Jewish communities westward. They came because London had one thing they needed: work. The work was horrifying, but it was work. At the Bryant and May Match Factory in Bow, East London, young women and girls, some as young as 13, dipped thin wooden sticks into white phosphorus to make matches, 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, for less than 5 shillings. The phosphorus entered their bodies through their skin, through their lungs, and through the food they ate at their workstations because they were not allowed to leave the room to eat meals. They ate with phosphorus still on their fingers. The first symptom was a toothache. Then the gums began to swell. Then the jawbone itself started to rot. The condition was called phossy jaw. And here is the detail that no one forgets once they hear it. The jawbone glowed in the dark. The phosphorus absorbed into the bone caused it to produce a faint greenish glow that was visible in a dark room. Women with phossy jaw could see their own face glowing at night. Then the bone died. Then it fell away. The mortality rate from phossy jaw at Bryant and May was nearly 1 in 5. The company knew about this. Their solution was to order workers to have their teeth pulled at the first sign of an ache. If a worker refused, she was fired. And on top of the poison, the company imposed fines. Fined for talking, fined for having dirty feet, fined for dropping matches, fined for using the toilet without permission. One worker was fined for adjusting a machine that was cutting her fingers. The fines could eat half a weekly wage. Think about the worst day you have ever had at work. Now picture that day as every day for the rest of your life, and add a jawbone that glows in the dark. That was considered a good job in 1888. If you are finding this useful, subscribe. There is more lost history like this every week. Below the factory workers, there were occupations so bizarre they sound invented. The pure finders walked the streets of London, collecting dog excrement with their bare hands. They sold it to leather tanneries who used it to soften animal hides. 200 to 300 people in London made their entire living this way. The toshers crawled through London's sewer tunnels in total darkness, waist deep in human waste, feeling through the filth for coins and jewelry that had been flushed down drains. They worked by candlelight, a single flame strapped to their chest, in tunnels so fragile the bricks could be scooped out with a spoon. They reported encountering rats the size of cats. One tosher told an interviewer that a man had been found in the sewers, eaten down to his bones by rats. There were legends of wild pigs that had been born and raised entirely underground, animals that had never seen daylight. And at the very bottom of this pyramid were the mudlarks. Children, mostly boys, some girls, as young as 6 years old. They waded barefoot into the freezing Thames mud at low tide, searching for anything they could sell: coal, rope, nails, bones. They cut their feet on broken glass and rusted metal buried in the mud. They worked in winter without shoes. The tidal Thames could rise faster than a child could run. Some of them drowned. When these workers finished their shifts, they went home. But the word home needs a completely new definition for 1888 London. A single room, 10 feet by 10 feet. A family of 6 inside it. No running water, no toilet, no heating except a handful of stolen coal in a tiny grate. One window, if they were lucky, looking out at a brick wall 3 feet away. One bed shared by the parents and youngest children. Older children slept on the floor, which was bare earth in the worst buildings and damp boards in the better ones. And here is where sleep itself became a commodity with a price structure. In many doss houses across the East End, beds were rented in shifts, 3 shifts per day, 8 hours each. When your 8 hours ended, someone else climbed in. The sheets, if there were sheets, were never changed between shifts. 3 complete strangers shared the same bed every 24 hours and never met each other. If you could not afford a bed, there were the 4-penny coffins, a narrow wooden box, literally the size and shape of a coffin, with a tarpaulin for a blanket. You climbed in, pulled the tarpaulin over yourself, and slept in a row of identical coffins that looked like a morgue that charged rent. One sandwich seller named John Fosh described his 4-penny coffin as very good for the money. Below the coffins was the 2-penny hangover, the rope from the beginning of this video. And below the rope was the cheapest option of all, the penny sit-up. For a single penny, you could sit on a bench in a warm room until morning, but you were not allowed to sleep. Monitors walked the room all night, shaking anyone who closed their eyes. Sleep was not included in the price of a penny. You paid for warmth, not rest. The Salvation Army operated many of these shelters, initially as the East London Christian Mission, hoping that providing even these grim comforts might draw the destitute toward the church. What they were actually doing was building the first organized system of homeless shelters in British history, coffins and ropes included. Here is a connection between this sleeping hierarchy and something much darker. 3 of Jack the Ripper's victims, the women murdered on the streets of Whitechapel in the autumn of 1888, lived in doss houses on the same street. On the nights they were killed, each of them had been walking the streets, trying to earn the 4 pennies needed for a coffin bed. The price of not dying on the street was 4 pennies. The price of failing to earn it was something far worse. What did these workers eat when they could afford food at all? The short answer is poison. Bread was the staple of the East End. Workers ate it at every meal. But the bread sold in the poorest neighborhoods was not food as we understand it. Bakers routinely mixed chalk into the flour to make it whiter, alum to make it heavier, because heavier bread sold for more money. Powdered bone, ground plaster. A worker eating bread 3 times a day was essentially eating a construction material 3 times a day. Milk was watered down to half its original volume and then bulked back up with chalk powder or plaster of Paris to restore the white color. The water used to dilute it came from the same sources that carried cholera and typhoid. The meat available to the poorest workers came from animals that had died of disease, sold green with rot, and washed in chemicals to disguise the smell. With food like that, it is no surprise that gin was the escape. A glass of gin cost a penny in the East End, cheaper than bread. The gin palaces of Whitechapel and Spitalfields were the most beautiful buildings most workers would ever set foot inside. Bright gas lights, polished brass rails, mirrored walls that reflected warmth and light back into rooms full of people whose homes had neither. These places were designed to feel like luxury. They sold temporary beauty to people whose lives contained none. A factory girl with a rotting jaw could walk into a gin palace on Commercial Street and, for 1 penny, for 20 minutes, exist in a room that did not want to hurt her. Disease moved through the East End the way water moves through a cracked wall, constantly, everywhere, invisibly. Cholera could kill within hours. A healthy worker could eat breakfast, feel stomach cramps by noon, and be dead by the time the sun went down. Tuberculosis thrived in those damp, overcrowded 10 by 10 rooms. A single infected person could spread the disease to an entire family just by breathing. Smallpox, scarlet fever, typhoid, diphtheria. The diseases rotated through the population in waves, and each wave took the youngest and oldest first. And here is the detail that makes Victorian disease truly bizarre. Germ theory had only been accepted by mainstream medicine in the 1880s. Most workers in the East End had never heard the word bacteria. They did not know what made them sick. The prevailing belief, even among many doctors, was that disease was caused by bad smells. They called it miasma. If something smelled terrible, it was dangerous. If something smelled fine, it was safe. This meant that a family drinking perfectly clear water from a pump contaminated with cholera believed they were safe because the water did not smell. Meanwhile, the toshers crawling through the sewers, surrounded by the worst smell in London, rarely caught cholera because the filth they waded through was not entering their drinking water. The people who smelled the worst were safer than the people who smelled nothing, and nobody understood why. The sewer workers also reported a side effect so strange that their supervisors refused to believe them. The steam rising from the sewers near breweries and distilleries contained enough alcohol vapor to make the workers drunk. Men emerged from the tunnels beneath London's brewery district intoxicated, stumbling and slurring their words, not from drinking, but from breathing. They called it being made innocent drunk by the sewers. It is possibly the strangest workplace hazard in history. The average life expectancy for a working man in the East End was 31 years, not because adults routinely died at 31, but because so many children died before age 5 that the average collapsed. 1 in 4. The causes of death recorded in parish registers read with a clinical detachment that is difficult to sit with. Debility from birth, wasting, marasmus, which is the medical term for a child who starved to death. Parents buried their children and went back to work the next morning because a day without wages was a day without food for the children still alive. Children in the East End were not children in any sense we would recognize. A child who could walk could work, and a child who could work was expected to earn. Boys as young as 4 climbed chimneys. The flues of London's houses were sometimes only 9 inches wide. The boys were sent up naked because their clothes would catch on the brickwork. They scraped soot from the walls with their bare hands and elbows. If a boy was too frightened to climb, the chimney sweep would light a small fire beneath him, climb or burn. Some got stuck in the flue and were left inside. The ones who survived developed a specific cancer of the scrotum from constant contact with soot. It was the first occupational cancer ever identified in the history of medicine, and it was found in children. Education had been made compulsory in 1880, but in the East End it was nearly unenforced. A child who could earn 4 pennies a day was worth more to a starving family than a child who could read. The choice between literacy and dinner was made every morning, and dinner won every time. And here is one final detail about Victorian children that is not horrifying so much as deeply, strangely sad. Because so many children died, 1 in 4 before age 5, many families never had a photograph taken of their child while alive. Photography was expensive. You did not waste money on a portrait of a baby who might not survive the winter. But when a child died, the family would sometimes pay for a photograph of the dead child posed as if sleeping, sometimes with eyes painted onto the closed eyelids to make them appear alive. These death portraits were often the only image a family ever had of their child. They kept them in lockets, on mantelpieces, in family albums beside the living. The dead child, frozen in silver, remembered forever in the only portrait they could afford, the one taken after they stopped breathing. Everything described so far, the rope, the coffins, the factories, the phossy jaw, the children in the chimneys, all of it was considered normal. It was not hidden, it was not secret. The wealthy knew, the government knew, everyone knew. In fact, wealthy Victorians invented a hobby called slumming. They dressed down, hired a guide, and took evening tours through the East End, visiting doss houses and gin palaces for entertainment. They treated the worst poverty in Europe as a tourist attraction. They wrote letters to their friends about the fascinating squalor. The same people who could have changed the conditions with their money chose instead to pay to observe them. Then, in July of 1888, something happened that nobody expected. The match girls walked out, 1,400 of them from the Bryant and May factory in Bow, mostly teenagers, many already showing the early signs of phosphorus poisoning, all of them earning less than 5 shillings a week, all of them replaceable, all of them invisible. A co-worker had been sacked for speaking to Annie Besant, a journalist and social reformer who had published an article about conditions in the factory. The company demanded the remaining workers sign a document stating they were satisfied with conditions at Bryant and May. The women refused. They walked out without a union, without a strike fund, without savings, without any plan at all. The strike lasted 3 weeks. The match girls marched through the streets of London. They spoke at public meetings. Factory workers who had never spoken in public before stood in front of crowds and described what white phosphorus does to a human jaw. They collected money from strangers. London's newspapers, which had never published a single word about conditions inside a match factory, suddenly could not look away. Bryant and May surrendered. They abolished the fines. They improved the ventilation. They recognized the union the women formed, which became the largest union of women and girls in the entire country. 1,400 teenage girls with rotting jaws changed British labour law forever, and they did it in 3 weeks with nothing. And here is the part that tells you everything about 1888. We know what the match girls did. We do not know who they were. Not one of those 1,400 women was considered important enough to have her name recorded individually. 1,400 people who changed a nation, and history remembered the event but forgot every single person in it. The world the match girls fought against did not disappear overnight. It took decades of reform, factory acts, housing legislation, public health laws. The White Phosphorus Matches Prohibition Act was not passed until 1908, 20 years after the strike. 2 world wars reshuffled the social order in ways no Victorian could have predicted. And somewhere in the middle of all of this, a quiet revolution happened in bedrooms. In 1871, a German inventor named Heinrich Westphal took steel coils originally designed for the seats of horse-drawn carriages and used them to build something that had never existed before: an inner spring mattress. For the first time in human history, a bed could push back. The coils provided support that straw and feathers never could. And unlike rope beds, they did not sag and demand nightly tightening. Westphal's invention should have made him wealthy. It did not. The inner spring mattress was too far ahead of its time. Nobody trusted it. Nobody wanted it. Heinrich Westphal died in poverty, never seeing his creation reach a single customer at scale. It took more than 60 years for inner spring mattresses to become affordable and mainstream. By the 1930s, factories could mass produce them, and for the first time in history, a decent bed was not a luxury reserved for the wealthy. The mattress was democratized. Sleep became a right, not a privilege. Think about that timeline for a second. The match girls went on strike in 1888. Heinrich Westphal invented the modern mattress in 1871, but regular working people could not actually buy one until the 1930s. For more than 60 years, the mattress existed, and the people who needed it most could not afford it. The streets where all of this happened are still there. Whitechapel Road, Brick Lane, Commercial Street, Flower and Dean Street, where the Doss houses stood. The buildings have changed. The people have changed. The geography has not. Walk through the East End of London today, and you are walking on the same stones where children crawled through mud for pennies and women leaned on ropes to sleep. The language remembers what the history books forgot. The word tosser, the common British insult, evolved from tosher, the men who crawled through the sewers. Over the years, tosher became tosser and lost its original meaning, but the insult survived. Every time someone in Britain calls another person a tosser, they are unknowingly referencing a Victorian sewer worker covered in human waste. The minimum wage exists because of what happened when there was none. Health and safety regulations exist because girls' jawbones rotted in match factories. Labor unions exist because 1,400 women walked out of a building and refused to go back in. The mattress on your bed exists because a German inventor nobody remembers repurposed springs from a horse carriage and died before anyone noticed. Tonight, when you lie down, your body will settle into a surface that was engineered to support you. Springs or foam or latex will absorb your weight. Clean sheets will cover you. The room will be warm. You will not pay by the hour. No one will cut a rope at 5 in the morning to wake you up. No one will shake you awake for the crime of closing your eyes on a bench. Every single one of those comforts was built by people whose names we never learned, in rooms we would not survive, on streets that still carry the echo of what it cost to simply lie down. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel. There are more lost worlds waiting to be rebuilt. Click the video on screen now.